I've been asked where this is. You know, this that I speak about and others speak about. And it's a good question. Where is this? There, there isn't a definitive answer to that question. But what I could say, and I think it's what I said to whoever asked me it, is that it's not inside or outside. So the illusion is that I happen inside. Everything that's inside is me. And then everything that happens outside is not me. This sense that there's two places. Essentially, there's two spaces. I'm the space where I live, and everything else lives in the outside space. Well, there isn't a separate space for me. That's what seems to have, whatever seemed to separate the space, there's no separation between everything and me. So you could say there's only one space, but it's when there's only space, there's not one space, just space. And it's not even that this happens in this space. There's just this space. That's particularly pertinent to thought and feeling. Because, of course, for me, I always felt that thoughts were happening in my head and feelings were happening in my body. And I don't know how it is for you, but when there's feeling, feeling is everywhere. Especially, it depends on the feeling, but very powerful feelings like intense sadness or intense joy, then it really is that the trees are crying, or the trees are laughing, the leaves are dancing. And I have no idea what non-duality means. It doesn't really mean anything. I just think it's naturally that there isn't this separation between inside and outside. There aren't separate spaces where things happen. And without separate spaces where things happen, where things exist, then the separateness of things just dissolves. The separateness of things only really is concrete and real when I'm real. And I don't mean then that everything is unreal. There's really no knowing whether things are real or not. It's a real, very, very simple not knowing and not caring. The obsession that self seems to have is that I need to know what's real and what's unreal. There's no knowing of that. This is as real as it's unreal, and as unreal as it's real. And if it's glaringly obvious that the only reality is what you say is real, what you think is real, then it's seen for the insignificance that it is. Does it really matter? Is it as important as it is, as it always seems to be for me? It's no good looking for that singular space. You won't find it. There is just space, which you could call emptiness, and there's nothing to be found. So you'll only find what seems to be happening. There's nothing else to see. So disappointingly, this isn't a finding. It's finding that there's nothing to find, which may or may not be a relief. It may or may not be a disappointment. I'd be surprised if it's not disappointing to the one who was desperate to find out what was real, to know the truth. This isn't knowing the truth. There's no certainty. This kind of annihilates any chance of certainty. So I end up saying things like this doubtless uncertainty, because I don't doubt that I don't know. I don't doubt that no one else knows either, regardless of what they tell me. There's relief in that too. You know that there must be some human beings who know the secret. I don't doubt that there are human beings who think they know the secret. That's not what I mean. You just might not be interested in human beings who say they know the secret anymore. So I had a meeting here on Saturday, which was lovely. And just to let you know that I've advertised another meeting because I enjoyed it. What other reason would I have for doing it? And the next meeting will be on the 23rd of November. And so if you'd like to come, then please email me at clistim@gmail.com. Not that it means anything, but it was, I'm going to just say how different it was sitting at home. The informality of it was really very lovely compared to being in a meeting room with chairs in rows and people always, people, I don't know, doesn't mean anything. Just means I enjoyed it. Isn't it wonderful that actually nothing means anything? Absolutely. The only meaning is the meaning that each human being gives to what seems to be happening. That is it. If that's undeniable, which it seems to be undeniable, then, I mean, it's not what most people are looking for. Most people are looking for exactly the opposite. They're looking for what is the true meaning? What is the absolute meaning? Well, absolutely none. And then each human being and the meaning they bring to what seems to be happening is all that meaning means. So in that, meaning is liberated. It is absolutely meaningless. And then it can be really apparent that all arguments are about meaning. Pretty much, almost 100%. One human being's meaning arguing with another human being's meaning. Who gives a shit? Well, there's a very simple answer to that. I do. Me and my meaning. That's who cares. That's who wants to argue. That's who wants to prove a point. And of course, the word belief comes into it. If you really believe the meanings that you've ascribed to life, then you're willing to die or kill for those, it seems. Self is. Well, meaning isn't worth dying for. But self would disagree. A lot of selves would disagree with that. Well, if you've got a question, then feel free to ask it. Or if you want to talk about a topic rather than a direct question. Jeremy.
Can you hear?
Hello, mate.
There you go. Get the sense that the sense of being a person is like a buffer. I think I may have heard it referred to as such.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a cushion, or a filter. And it's often been said that when it's gone, there's a sense of nakedness. There's nothing left to dress anything with, or I was wondering whether you could talk about that sense of nakedness that often people talk about, that I sense isn't there when a person's, because I'm chock-a-block full of meaning and stories and me, and all of that.
There's I've spoken about that. Well, self is afraid, and so self will protect itself. So it always has this sense of I need as many layers of protection as I can give myself. Otherwise, I'm terrified of feeling naked. One of the biggest fears one of the recurring dreams that I always had as a teacher when I was teaching was I'd be standing in front of the class. This is in a dream. I'd be standing in front of the class, and then all the kids would start laughing, and I'd feel the humiliation, and I'd go, well, "What are you laughing at?" And then they'd just all point, and I'm start bollock naked. Well, from the waist down.
Yeah.
So I've got no pants on.
Mm.
And self is terrified of humiliation.
Yeah.
And will do everything it can to not feel that vulnerability. So that self-protection can feel like clothing, but I would say the most protected selves, the ones it feels more like a suit of armor. It's like armor plated. You know the selves you've met who are really so guarded, so protected. They're wearing layers, and it's all illusory, but in order to keep myself safe, then I need that illusion to be intact. And so that's one aspect of it, that self is terrified of naked vulnerability. And in my story, when it felt like I was dying, I say it felt like I was dying, it really felt like being skinned. It felt like I didn't even have skin to protect me. It was like every layer was being, it didn't feel like it was peeling away. It felt like it was being torn away. It was very unpleasant. I'm not saying it has to feel unpleasant, but I'd be surprised if it doesn't feel at least a little unpleasant to have what you've said has kept you safe, which is this illusory boundary, this filter, this protection. But really, of course, there isn't anything between me and everything else, because there isn't actually anyone inside to be protected. But it's not by chance. Most of therapy, when I was training as a therapist, it was mostly about boundaries. Boundaries were one of the main topics of conversation. Boundaries. Well, there you have it. In a nutshell, what I am boundary. I know where I end and you begin. And I need to keep the distinction. Otherwise, I won't feel grounded. I won't know where I am. I won't know who I am. And for self, that can feel like free fall, like falling, like. And the other common phrase in psychotherapy is feeling grounded. You know, and I know where I stand as opposed to where you stand. And I am very clear about the difference. So I mean, whilst there is a sense of self, I think self absolutely feels the need for boundary and feels the need for this feeling that I'm protecting myself. The wonder is that there's nothing that needs protecting. And there aren't any boundaries. It's just made me think. I saw a post on Facebook yesterday that said, "Fuck your boundaries, give me a hug," which I did like. I just think, but it's all very well saying that, but of course most selves are terrified of a hug. I know men who are wearing a suit of armor, who a hug is the most repulsive, obnoxious from another man, especially. It's like the worst thing imaginable.
My son-in-law is Italian, so
he loves a hug.
They all hug and kiss the blokes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the sense of self that feels naked, not.
Yeah, I mean, it is that there is no one to be naked. So you could say when there's only nakedness, then there's no feeling of being naked. No.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Because really it's a fear of being naked that requires this.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. So you could say, I mean, what does naked actually mean?
Yeah.
If there's no others. I mean, it can, and it's the same with vulnerability. If there's only vulnerability, then it's hard to distinguish the sense of feeling vulnerable from feeling safe, because they both rely on someone to feel vulnerable, to feel safe.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that I feel safe or vulnerable. And yeah, of course, it could be that both could appear. There could be a feeling. Now, there is a difference between psychological vulnerability and physical. I could feel physically vulnerable from a snarling dog and shit my pants and feel great fear. But that's not really the vulnerability we're talking about. It's like the vulnerability that we're talking about is that you could get to see the real me. Me's very afraid of being seen, longs for it intensely, longs to be seen, terrified of being seen, longs to be vulnerable, terrified of feeling vulnerable, longs for love, terrified of love. I mean, that's a terrible generalization. That's not for all selves, but I would say that that's all pretty common. Yeah, but to go back to that feeling of wearing a suit of armor or being keeping my boundaries solid and real, feeling that they're real, is self longs to get rid of that. That's why self longs for intimacy, but it's terrified of it. So there's always a conflict in that. Whereas there really isn't any vulnerability or there isn't anyone who's having those feelings. They just appear or not.
Mm-hmm.
Life is a lot easier without having to keep the,
Keep the show on the road, bet.
keep the protection, keep it up, keep up, appearances, and keep myself safe from others.
Mm. Do you notice others notice that you don't need to do that?
Do I notice who else is naked?
No. Do others notice that you don't need to play the game?
Do you know, every self is so self-absorbed it notices fuck all about any other self. That's
Yeah,
I tell you what, that's what I've noticed.
Yeah, exactly.
If you now, the whole illusion that most selves suffer from, more than anything else, is thinking that others give a shit about yourself.
Exactly.
They
Absolutely.
do not give a shit.
No.
No.
You can go through the most intense pain and nobody notices.
And you'll go, haven't you noticed how, I'm actually utterly naked? Can't you tell how I've changed? Well, if your change affects them, and they don't like how you've changed, then you'll hear about it. But if it doesn't directly, if it doesn't impinge on their world, on my world, then no. This is the whole illusion of me, is that others can see me and will notice how I'm different. No, they might notice some behavioral differences, but no, you've never been seen, so no one will notice.
Wow.
If you stop doing stuff that you did for other people that they liked you doing, then you'll get some complaints, but otherwise no one will say anything. I would say the only thing that people really complained about my change was I stopped going to work. So then I was just a waste of space who was just sponging off the state or whatever, just a waster. The working self, the pride that self has in being a good citizen and, responsible, and hates all that. But no one will see if you're naked.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
And interestingly, neither will you. Here's the thing. You wouldn't even notice if you were naked.
How do you mean?
Well, if you're not there, if there is just what you might call naked being,
yes,
there's no noticing.
Yeah,
Because there's no one who's actually naked.
Yeah.
And there's no one who's vulnerable.
Yeah.
You don't suddenly feel superhuman, though. It's not as good as it sounds. Your total invulnerability, apart from kryptonite. There's nothing superhuman about it. I would say the absence of self is only noticeable at all by the absence of some of the symptoms that self seemed to produce. That's all that was ever noticed. Oh yeah, there seems to be less guilt, less fear. Maybe, but not. There can be no noticing of the absence of something that never was.
Mm.
So that's probably why I might call this the greatest disappointment, because of course I really wanted to be there when it happened.
Me.
to celebrate,
Yeah.
It's like turn up. You don't get to turn up at your own funeral.
Yeah.
Because you want to hear all the mourners, you want to hear how wonderful, what all the lovely things people said about you, but you don't get to turn up. And if you suggest you've died, then no one's going to believe you anyway. So you can't even tell anyone. Your only chance of ever sharing it is becoming a non-duality speaker. Yeah. I made the mistake of telling a lot of people. I told my friends and my family. And of course, they did worry about me then. Don't go around telling people you're dead. They won't appreciate it.
No, no way.
No.
It's just utterly inconceivable, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it is nonsense as well.
Yeah.
Because there's no one to die.
Yeah. Thanks.
Cheers, Jeremy. It's not very jolly, but while we're on the subject of death, while I brought it up, I might as well re-emphasize that death is not separate from birth, and death is always, birth is always. Then the illusion is the life in between. So what we call life is always being born, always passing away. And the illusion is the space in between the birth and death where you live. So self always sees life as separate from birth and death. It's the continuity that happens in between. And there's no in between. There is no space between. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Tim.
Hey.
Yeah, I was cutting my fingernails this morning and just looking at uh looking at my fingers and fingernails as I was doing so, and they felt alive and dead at the same time, like here today, gone tomorrow. It just felt weird, but weirdly comforting as well. I don't know if that's what you're talking about, but it resonated.
I don't know if that's what I'm talking about either.
Who does? Who knows anything? I probably haven't shared here. Elsewhere, I've shared one of my favorite sayings is by Fat Swaller. One never knows. Do one.
Oh, yeah. Do one. One never knows, do one. No, one doesn't. Does one? Here's the thing that I would have never guessed, that not knowing is perfectly okay. I'd have never guessed that. Having been a know-all and a seeker of more know-allness, just wanted more knowledge, And one of the reasons I seemed to cry so much when this was undeniable was that all my knowledge was laid to waste. It was just so useless, so wonderfully useless. It was beautiful, but annihilating. All my work, all the work that I'd done on myself, not only was it useless, it had never even happened. I hadn't even done any work on myself. It was so annihilating of all of that. Nothing to be proud of, nothing to be ashamed of.
Asks in the chat, how did your family and friends react when you told them that you had died?
Did I just say that?
Oh, did you? Did you?
Well, no, I sort of alluded to it. I don't think I was that explicit. I don't think I said I died, but I did. It was more in when it seemed to be happening that it felt like I was dying. So they were terribly, terribly concerned about me, as I was, because there was so much fear. So I'd asked to die, and then it seemed as though death came to get me. He didn't appear as the Grim Reaper. He appeared as nothing. It was nothing that came. It was emptiness that came. It was the void. It was pitch black nothing. So it was more that, speaking in the story afterwards, it was more like that, well, is he ever going to get better? I hope they've given up that hope by now. Doesn't look like I'm getting any better. But yeah, it'd be very natural for any people who love you, who care about you, to be concerned if you're in distress. I would say now that I seem okay, I'm not screaming as much, then they don't seem as worried.
Always reminds me of that Villagers song, that Nothing Arrived.
Oh, it's a lovely song.
I waited for something, but something died, so I waited for nothing, and nothing arrived.
It's lovely.
Mm.
So in that story, when nothing arrived, I said, fuck off, I've changed my mind. That's what I said. And I said it a lot of times. Because, of course, I was never looking for nothing. I didn't want it to be nothing. I was looking for something spectacularly wonderful, not nothing. I probably never said I died, really, because it didn't really feel appropriate. I just went on and on and on about emptiness, a bit like I still do, really. So it hasn't changed that much. But so how are you, Tim? Fucking empty. Well, what do you mean? I went, so fucking empty. And so I just said that over and over again. And if I'm trying to make sense of why there was only emptiness, it's because in contrast to the fullness of being me, because I was always full of me. You know, this human being was full of itself, like most selves. So in contrast to that, the emptiness seemed overwhelming, debilitating. I didn't know what to do with nothing. What are you going to do with it? So I spent a long time saying, what the fuck am I going to do now? But if you sit long enough, something just happens. You may have noticed that already. You know, you go, well, what shall I do? What shall I do? I've got to, you know, shall I do that? Shall I do this? I don't know what to do. If you sit, then the body just moves. Okay. And I did fear that I would do nothing until the body died. Well, so what? If you did, so what? It's just that your friends and family might not like it. But there's so much of self is wrapped up in, you know, doing the right thing. And not knowing what the right thing is very disconcerting when, you know, that's a habit of a lifetime. We've got fireworks.
Asia has a hand up.
Razia.
Hi, Tim.
Hi, Razia.
Yeah, like when you're talking about dying, like I kept thinking some are born to everlasting life. And I think that's the saying in the Bible. Like it
Sorry,
reminded me like
say that
this,
again. You're born to everlasting life.
yeah, that kept coming up, that some are born to everlasting life. I don't know why, but it's like a thought. Probably picking up something. But I mean, like I was thinking about like this one day when I was standing on the beach, right? And I knew like it was like you got this feeling like something's going to happen, like you must move, you know? And I couldn't. And then this huge wave came up and then toppled me into the water. I couldn't swim. And then I couldn't, like, I realized like I couldn't find my feet, you know, in the water. Like, and at that moment, it was like I was really like going to die. And then and the thought in my head was, so this is how it ends. So this is how the story ends. That was all. And then I just embraced this. I don't know, it was just like collapsing into the water and saying, yeah, okay, this is it, you know? And then suddenly there was this voice in my head. And I said, no, you're not going to die. Someone is going to save you. And at that particular moment, I looked out of the water and there was this person walking towards me. I don't know how I looked out of the water. And then he came and he was dragging me out. And like halfway out, he said, you know what, you're not making an effort. I'm going to leave you here. And I looked at him now and I'm saying, hey, why didn't you leave me when I was there? It was so lovely there. It was so peaceful, you know, and so beautiful. And now you brought me out of it. The pain had started and now you're going to leave me here. You know?
So you complained when someone saved your life because you were in bliss, drowning.
It is so amazing. And yeah,
I have heard those stories before, yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing. But I didn't like see anything or all I felt was this peace, this immense peace. Like this was it. And I'm okay with it, you know? And yeah, then anyway, I got to the shore and I couldn't breathe. I mean, I thanked him, I kissed him on his cheek and hugged him because, I mean, he had given me a second chance, so to speak. I don't know if that was a good thing. At that time, I didn't appreciate it. Maybe not as much. But yeah, and then I was sitting there and then I had another thought. And it was like almost like a voice in my head. It said, no, I saved you now. I just found you. And I'm not going to let you die. And then, like, I mean, there is this duality in this because there is this, like, you feeling like someone is talking to you, you know? But how can that be? Because there's no other. So the only thing I can think about is that's
We've lost Razi.
yeah, I don't know. That somehow, yeah, there's some things they just can't understand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yes, but that was it when you talk about like dying. Yeah, I actually had these experiences so many times of dying. And each time it was like so beautiful. It's like your body gets so icy cold. And then you're not there anymore, you know? And yeah, twice I had that feeling. That's like I was out of body. But I mean, obviously people have experienced much more than I have and know more about this. So, but I mean, like, and at the end of the day, to know that there is no other out there. Yeah, aside from yourself. And there can be no secrets because it's all you. Just revealing yourself to you.
Thanks.
I was thinking about what you were saying earlier, Tim, about you know, that seeking and how it feels like it's a complete failure, but the failure is that there isn't any failure or success. It's yeah, it sort of feels like what you were looking for, you were trying to get. It's just the complete failure of getting that. But the end of failure and success in itself. So it's not a failure either.
No. No, the impossibility of success is not something that self is ever seeking.
Mm.
And yet that is the peace. The peace is the impossibility of succeeding.
Yeah.
And of course, if there's no success, there is no failure.
Mm.
And yet what you fear, what self always feared, I had a dreadful fear of failure, especially performance anxiety, that I would perform, you know, sport or actually any performance really. As a teacher, every day was a performance and I would suffer I covered it up well, but I had I'd have nightmares regularly about losing control, not being able to manage the kids, you know, failing basically, just like most selves do. And yet it's not the impossibility of failure what's where the peace lies. The peace is that there's no possibility of success. No one succeeds at life. Now, relatively, whatever you've aspired to, you will look at human beings who you'll say are successful. But I mean, another human being will look at that and go, well, that's a complete waste of time. I'm not impressed by any of that. Success is always just relative. Absolutely, there's no success.
Yeah, it's just like a comparison story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's no winners.
And there's a sort of you sort of attribute the success to their own volition, to their yeah. But that's
Well,
the
thing is, most selves would never give up their fear of failure, because if they did, then they wouldn't be able to take credit for their success.
the glory.
Yeah, you need to be able to acknowledge your failure. Otherwise, you won't be able to bathe in the glory when you achieve it. Of course, there's neither.
I think it was Gore Vidal or somebody like that who said, it's not enough that I succeed, others must fail.
Well, of course, that is good, because of course, if others don't fail, what does your success mean? Yeah, others must fail. Yeah, in fact, the majority must fail in order for there to be any success at all. Success only rests on the shoulders of all the failure. Because what's the success in ordinary everyday life? There's no success in that. And yet that's all there ever is. Yeah, Lena.
Hello.
Hello.
I just been noticing how much people put emphasis on whether someone is attractive or not,
Mm-hmm.
as if they did that themselves. It's like it's amazing, like how
Yeah.
that's such a precursor to living life, like as if
Mm-hmm.
you're good looking, I'm not good looking, and I got into the middle of a heated argument between two friends, and I just like had to say, I'm like, you guys, like the only way good looks are actually useful is if you're also born with the gift of being able to use them to get what you want.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but that is true, because in most cases that the two don't correlate. And actually the good looks in that case where they don't correlate becomes like more of like a curse than a blessing, because you're confused as to why nothing works out.
Well, I mean, for a lot of physically beautiful selves, the beauty is a curse.
Yes.
Because,
and I
because
agree.
nearly every beautiful self that I'm physically beautiful human being, their sense of self always feels that they're being judged just on their beauty and not for themselves, and self desperately wants to be seen and acknowledged for itself.
Yeah.
And most selves aren't that shallow that they can't acknowledge, they can't see that physical beauty they can't take any credit for.
Yeah.
Self really can't take any credit for genetics. as much as it would like to. Self would love to take credit for its parents, you know. And and there are. I mean, you can read shit where you chose your parents. You know, self will take that as well. It will, you know, it knows no limit to its grandiosity of claiming everything for itself, including previous lives, choosing your parents. You chose everything. I mean, it's self loves that.
Yeah, it's funny if yeah, like if you really did have a choice, why would you choose that? You know, like there's so
Well,
like,
and nearly every, I mean, most most selves have a real thing about, well, if I did have a choice, I wouldn't have chosen those two as my parents.
right.
That's for sure. I'd have made a wiser choice. That's pretty universal, but not everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a sometimes I say that to my mom. I'm like, but don't get upset because it's not
Yeah.
that bad, but I wouldn't have.
But it's not just, I mean, the thing, most selves can acknowledge that they had no say in their physical, about the body that I've been given. Most selves will acknowledge that. But it's the thing is, it's the same with everything else. I mean, you haven't chosen your character. You haven't chosen any of it.
Definitely not. I would throw this thing in the
Oh,
garbage as fast as possible.
no, it's
Yeah.
and there is a wonderful innocence if it becomes undeniable that there was no self to do any choosing of any behavior, all your attitudes, all your beliefs, everything is innocent. All your feelings, it's the innocence of everything is astounding, and that doesn't solve any problems, but what it does, it just makes it allows an okayness with everything that seems to be wrong. So it's not a denial of you. There could be a preference for things being very different, but then there's just a total innocence to everything being as it is, and that goes for self and everyone else. There's no one who could be any different than they are, and that innocence is unconditional, and it might feel like love, it might not, but it might. It might, even if you don't like it, it still might. Love is not acceptance. Resistance is as much love as acceptance ever is. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. Sorry to American friends who didn't make it clear enough about the time change. Your clocks will go back, so next week will be straightforward. Yeah, thanks for coming. Thanks, Darren.
Thanks, Tim.
Lovely to see everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Bye. See you.
Thank you.
Michael, just so you could give a little plug. When am I doing Perfectly Okay meeting with you?
Sequoia will help me here. I think it's Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific. Is that right? No, 11 Pacific.
11 a.m. Pacific
Yes.
time.
Yes.
Yes, 11 a.m. Pacific.
Next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday.
Okay.
We'll be in touch.
I'll put that on my website.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank